This video is meant for all in our community who have recently been laid off and are thinking about becoming a consultant. I've been extremely fortunate in my own line of work, and I found a super good mentor a few years ago. That was Mike Hewland at iReservoir. And a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you today are things I've learned from him. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ali Jaffrey. I'm the CEO of Applied Stratigraphics, which is a consulting firm, and we provide services and training in sedimentology, sequence stratigraphy, structural geology, and mining out of Denver, Colorado. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So what we'll cover today is who we are and how we got started, and what kind of consultant you want to be, because I think it's very important to know that there are different kinds of consultants. We're going to talk about the good, which are advantages of being independent, the bad, which are disadvantages, and the ugly, which are circumstances beyond your control. And then in the end, I'm going to teach you how you can get started, the paperwork, CPAs, and things like that. So who are we? Well, we are a group of geoscientists, and we're all over the place. So I'm based out of Denver, Colorado, but Prerna is in Houston, Angel is actually in Peru, and we're all over the place. I'm very, very proud of my team. I finally have a team that I wanted for a while, and just a great collection of people who love what they do, and they're very, very good at it. And of course, they're all consultants. So, but they're not independent. They're all working with me. So I'm going to show you how I got started. And for those of you who don't know who this is Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia. And you can see he's sporting a Che Guevara jacket right there. And in 2006, right when I was starting a PhD program at Colorado State University, I was supposed to walk into a PhD program that was fully funded by Total. And the project was to look at mud-rich turbidites in Bolivia. And of course, that is when Evo Morales came into power. And one of the first things he did was to get rid of all the oil companies, including Total. So the project got scrapped, and I was in this program not knowing what to do. And that pretty much got my consulting career started, because my advisor, Dr. Sven Egenhoff, he had just moved from Germany's version of Colorado School of Mines to the US. And of course, he didn't know anyone, so he didn't have any funding. So we had to figure something out. And I just finished an internship with EOG Resources in Denver, so I was familiar with the Bakken. So I contacted a few companies, and I was like, hey, what can I possibly do for you? And it was my first introduction to the world of consulting. Because you have to meet clients in the middle. You have to do stuff that is meaningful for them. And what was meaningful for Delta Petroleum at the time were these oil-bearing sands in the Paradox Formation. So I decided they had me describe core for them, funded my dissertation. Brigham joined forces, did a lot of core work on the Bakken for them. And then we established the Bakken Consortium, and we got SM Energy involved, and it all worked out for the best. You know, I got a good handle on how to do this. And it also introduced us to the different faces of consulting, including the ugly side. And that's something we're going to talk about later on. But the quick story there is that I remember Sven and I flew down to Enid, Oklahoma to meet with Continental Resources. And Enid put us up, you know, the Continental Resources guys, they put us up in this motel, which was like a rough version of Motel 6 or something. And they just got us one room. So it was Sven and I in one room together. And I remember walking into the meeting, we did the meeting, and it was at lunchtime. And when the meeting was over, they handed us a bottle of water each. There was no lunch offered. And I looked at Sven and I'm like, man, you know what? I can't turn into an older white dude, but since you are, maybe you should change your name from Sven to Bob. Of course, he never did, but I think that would have been good for his consulting career. But that was how I started. After that, after graduating, I worked for a few companies and then started my consulting firm, Applied Stratigraphics, in 2012. And this is where we're at right now. So 56 is the number of companies that we've provided training or consulting to. 500, over 500 are the number of oil and gas professionals that I personally have trained. 10 is the number of companies where I've done either consulting work or trained individuals. And currently we've got over 30,000 followers on LinkedIn between our joint profiles. So these are some of the companies we've worked with, you know, whether they're big or small, they're all equally important because they've supported us. And we cannot thank them enough for their support over the years. But if so, that's all I wanted to talk to you about myself, because this talk is not about me, it's about you and helping you get into the world of consulting if that's what you want to know. But I figured before you get into the world of consulting, you should be able to make an educated decision as to what it's all about. And having 9 years of experience since I formed Applied Stratigraphics, I figured that may be useful. So the first thing you need to know is that there's different types of consultants. You know, I kind of split these up into, you could be a lone ranger, which means you're 100% independent, which means you've got no affiliation with a consulting firm. You do your own thing if and when you feel like. And there's a lot of people who've done that. They've been super successful at it. You know, maybe you could just name the company after yourself, you know, like Zeitlin Consulting, that's an example. And then there's the team player, which means you're pretty much doing what you used to, just like your last company where you were a full-time employee. You go in and you're working 9 to 5, except that you just happen to be working for a consulting firm. Okay, so if you're a people person and you enjoy what you did when you were working for an oil and gas company, this may be the path. And I think this is a great way to start, actually. You know, a lot of people think that the only way to do this is to be independent, but that's not true. You could be a consultant, but be part of a team, which is what we've got going on in Applied Stratigraphics. And then the last is this funky category that I think I kind of started with a while ago. Of course, you can do this as a lone ranger, or you could do this as a team player, but essentially you're a consultant who specializes in doing work overseas. So let's talk about these in some more detail. So when I think of a successful independent consultant, I think the first person I think of is Jeff Main. If you can see Jeff here, he's smiling, and Jeff is always smiling. I've known Jeff for 14 years now. He was my mentor during my internship at EOG Resources. And you will never ever meet anyone who has anything negative to say about Jeff. People can't say that about me. You know, there's a lot of people who can't stand me, but Jeff is he's a true rock star in the sense that he's got good connections. Everyone in the Denver community knows him. He's built a niche for himself. Okay, he's the expert in most of these Rocky Mountain basins when it comes to these siliciclastics and you know, and now in carbonates as well. So he has this solid reputation, which you need, because word of mouth is huge in the consulting world. Okay, if you do good work for someone, everyone's going to find out about it. And if you do a lousy job, people are going to find out about it. So reputation is huge. You need to have all the tools to be able to work independently, which means you need to have the right software, because you're not collaborating with anyone. So you got to have everything in place. You're a one-man or one-woman show, which means you handle your everything from your marketing to your accounting, your printing, and that's a lot. It sounds easier than it is, okay? And we're going to talk about some of these aspects later on. But most importantly, what you're offering is so unique that you can stand up to the competition, because I'll tell you what, if you're a sedimentologist or a structural geologist, or even if you're a borehole image specialist, whatever your thing is, man, there's a lot of competition out there, and your competitors have been around for a while. They know the ropes. They've got an established network, and for you to break into that, it's tough, but it's doable. And I think Jeff is he's a fantastic example. Great person to know. Now, the second category is a team player. So this is if you're a consultant but you're working for a consultant firm. And the best person that I can think of as an example is Molly. And Molly's a structural geologist. She was with Chesapeake for a while until Chesapeake laid her off. I still need to send Chesapeake a thank you card for doing that. Can't appreciate that enough. But I brought on Molly because I saw she had a strong LinkedIn presence, and she's a top influencer in the world of structural geology. And I brought her on, and I didn't know her that well, but since then, she's like the definition of a team player, in the sense that, when you enter a consultant team, everyone is super qualified. They're all experts, but if you're going to be a team, you need to go above and beyond being just an expert, and that's what she does. So she turned, this way you earn your team's respect, which she did. She's a people person, even though it's a consulting firm, and it could be just a group of 10 people or so, or maybe 30 to 40 in the case of these bigger consulting groups. It's very important that you understand company culture, which actually reminds me of a funny story, because when I decided that, maybe being an independent consultant was not good enough, maybe I needed to be part of something bigger, I contacted SEA consultants in Houston. And and they ignored me for a bit, but I'm persistent, so I pursued them. And then finally the lady got back to me, and she said that, Ali, you don't fit the profile you don't fit the profile of SEA consultants, of what we're looking for. I was like, what is this? What is she talking about? I've taught multiple courses across the globe. What's going on here? So I got on their website. It's just a whole bunch of older white guys. And I was like, all right, I get it. So I wanted to put that picture in there, but they took it down. And since then, I've noticed they have hired some female geoscientists in there as well. But the bottom line is, yes, I would have never fit in there, because you can't hang with folks that aren't like you. So it's important that you know that even if there's a small consulting group, that they may have their own company culture. And it's very important to be aware of your personal limitations, knowing where your realm of knowledge ends and someone else's starts. That's super important, because when you're a one-man show, in the last example I gave you, then you have to do everything by yourself. But when you're a team player, you can be collaborative. And of course, the beauty of working for a company as a consultant is that they find someone else's job is finding you work. So you can still focus on just being technical, which is beautiful. And you got to put the company first, because there's always that temptation. There will always be that client that'll contact you and be like, hey, you know what? Why don't you do this for me? We don't have to let iReservoir know, or we don't have to let Terra X know. We could just deal amongst ourselves and not get anyone else in the middle, and you'd end up making more money, and I'd get a cheaper rate. And that happens a lot. But this reminds me, like two days ago, I was talking to one of our shale experts, Randy Blood. He's one of the top guys for the Marcellus and Utica out there. And he calls me up and he's telling me, he's like, hey, Ali, I got the eastern section of APG wanting me to give a course, and can I do this? And should I go through Applied Stratigraphics? And I'm like, you know what, man, they approach you, you should totally go for it. But that's Randy for you. That shows integrity. He could have totally not tell me about it, because on the East Coast of the US, everyone knows him already. He doesn't need the Applied Stratigraphics label for people to recognize him. He's got a solid reputation there. But that shows character, and that matters when you're part of a small consulting group. And then there's folks that like being overseas, and I think I put myself on there because I think this is what does it for me. Here I am, I'm holding a crab, standing on a mouth bar of the modern Indus Delta, talking about silanickness and biogenically enhanced permeability for subsurface reservoirs. And it's international consulting it's a thing, it's a totally different thing. But if you enjoy working with different cultures, you're multilingual, you don't mind teaching when you're jet lagged and tired, this may be the thing for you, because there's the further away you get from your own city and the US, the less competition there is. And you know, you can really make a name for yourself. But you gotta have a certain personality type. You know, like I tell people that there's something about, you know, sitting on the pot at 3 a.m. in the morning, you know, just because your tummy's upset because you know you're not used to the local food in this developing country that you're consulting in, and while you're sitting on the pot, you can hear the mosquitoes, you know, buzzing all around you, and just then, you know, you can hear some bombs going off in the distance, and there's just something about it, you know, it's unique. And it does it for me, but you know, it scares the crap out of others. I mean, I remember I think it was 2 years ago, I met a guy at a course, and he's like, hey, you know what, I'd like to be a part of your team. So we could start going back and forth on his contract, and this guy was Exxon, and he's like, if I go on these overseas assignments, will you provide security for me? And I'm like, nope. Because it's, you know, it's, when you're out there, you are your own security. And you know, as racist as it sounds, if you're in West Africa and you know the rebels are in town and all hell's breaking loose, you're the only white guy at the hotel, you got a hostage sign written all over your forehead, man. Yeah, that's a bad situation to be in, and there's really not much I can do for you, if you know. And of course, I sent him that email, and he just disappeared. But that's how it is. So you have to be prepared. You are your own security, and a lot of these places you go to aren't the best security wise. So you have to be mentally prepared for it. Be prepared for dubious offers. And I'll give you an example of that. I was recently contacted by a government official in a developing country, and he's like, hey, how much would it cost for you to come do a uranium exploration study for us? So I put all the numbers together, and I'm like, well, it's going to be $87,000. It's like, wait, can you make it 200,000? And I'm like, why would I do that? And he's like, well, the way we're going to do this, we're going to make it 100 even for you. I'm going to keep 100, and then we're going to give it to these military officials, and they're going to pass it on to the government, and they're going to make $2 million off of this. And I was like, oh, hell no, man, I'm not. So, you know, be prepared. There's a lot of that goes on, and be mindful, okay, that integrity comes with a price. You know, another example of that is I was recently contacted by a client, and while I was talking to that client, you know, he's talking to me about what all I can possibly do sedimentology wise, sequence stratigraphy wise, using well cuttings, and I'm like, nothing. You know, there's really not much we can do. You know, he's like, we did a presentation, the works, you know, broke it down for him that there's really not much we can do with just well cutting data. And just, you know, right when we were all done, a few weeks later, you know, he tells me how this other company in the UK is going to do all that for him. And hold on just a second, my kid is here. I'm sorry about that. So anyways, the long story short, a competitor contacts these guys, and they promised them the work. They're like, oh yeah, we can use your well cuttings to come up with fracture networks. We'll use your well cuttings, come up with the sequence stratigraphy framework, sedimentology, and of course they got the gig. So remember that integrity does come with a price. You're going to lose out on a lot of contracts just because there's someone out there who's, you know, who just doesn't have the same values. The other thing you need to understand is when you're overseas and you're doing this, you know, it's you're away from home, okay? And that can have a lot of, you know, you come back home. Like one time I came back home, and there's, you know, I paid someone to mow the lawn, but I come home and there's weeds all over the place, and the grass is grown, and there's a letter after letter from the HOA. You know, first one fining me for $25,000, 50, 100, they had to put a lien on the house. And that's not even counting the, the effect of you being away that it has on your family. So again, it's something to keep in mind. And then you need a lot of patience. You need a lot of patience if you're going to deal internationally. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. So I'm going to first talk about the advantages of being a Lone Ranger consultant. Okay, so you've been laid off, you want to do this on your own, you don't want to join someone else, you want to be your own boss. What are the advantages? So the biggest advantage is a tax break. Okay, so how does that work? Well, let's assume you made 100 grand a year. Okay, now most of your bills, especially if you're working from home, are tax deductibles. That's your internet bill, your cell phone bill, electric bill, your water bill, things like that. Then a lot of things can count as office supplies. If they're remotely related to your work, you can claim them as a business expense. In fact, the IRS does this calculation based on the area of your home office versus the area of your house. And you can even claim a percentage of your rent or your mortgage as a business expense. So let's say you made 100 grand, you deduct all this, and it comes out to be 20 grand. So you're going to be taxed on that 20 grand and not this amount. So your tax liability goes down significantly. And that's a huge, huge incentive as to why a lot of people get into being independent consultants. Okay, so that's one of the advantages. And of course, you have a lot of freedom. Okay, you make your own schedule, and if you're making your own schedule, you can spend more time with your family, your friends, your hobbies and activities. That's what initially got me into consulting, because I wanted to live in Colorado where I had access to being outdoors, hiking, climbing, and then spending time out in the field, out in Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming, being able to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu three times a week. So a lot of flexibility in your schedule. You choose what kind of work you need to do. You don't need to be well-rounded anymore. So if looking at fractures and borehole image logs is your thing, well, that's all you do. You look at fractures and borehole image logs. Okay, you don't have a boss, no more team leaders, no more corporate politics, which can be huge. And then you're not wasting time in meetings. I remember in Chevron, we used to have meetings. Then we have meetings about meetings, then have meetings after meetings, and and then corporate rituals like being called out if you don't hold on to the handrail, things like that. So of course, there's tons of freedom when you are an independent consultant. So speaking of Chevron, when I was there, they told me that if you're ever going to criticize someone, you got to say 3 nice things to them first. And that's sort of the approach I've taken in this talk here. So I've told you everything good about consulting. And now we're going to talk about some disadvantages. So the first thing you need to know is this is a business. So the day you become a consultant, when you were working for whatever company you were with, you were a geoscientist. In other words, you were a scientist. Okay. But the day you transition into the world of consulting, you are no longer a scientist. You are now a business person. So you're running your own business, and that is a totally different ballgame. Which means instead of doing high-level technical work, you're spending a lot of time marketing, advertising, networking. And these are things you may not be so good at, especially if you're older. Maybe you're not that familiar with social media and LinkedIn and Facebook, things like that. So here's this is just my work routines. Okay, so this is how it works out when oil prices are less than $60 a barrel. Usually wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I have to be able to chase my overseas clients. Chasing is a huge, huge part of consulting. And when oil prices are below $60 a barrel and it's crickets chirping, there's really nothing going on, you can see that pretty much all I'm doing is marketing. It's just nonstop. And I kid you not, I spend 4 to 6 hours on marketing every day. Okay. And if I'm not marketing, I'm working on the website, because your website is like your shop. Okay, this is how people meet you for the first time. So your website's got to look good. Your website's got to be updated. So a lot of time goes on the website. Then I do, for those of you who are familiar with applied stratigraphics or what I do, we do a lot of talks and webinars. In 2020, we probably did 11 webinars, Saudi, Kazakhstan, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Egypt, Pakistan, Norway, you name it, webinars all over the place. Just again, that's, technically that's still part of marketing, but that's just you interacting with people. And when it comes to actual work, when prices are less than $60 a barrel, there's very little work. Okay, this is just how it is. In fact, I'll be honest with you, when it comes to actual days of work in 2020, I think I got maybe 40 days. It was 40 days of work. And the rest of the time I was out in the field, or if I'm in the office, this is what I'm doing. Now, things, of course, change when oil prices get above $60 a barrel. So, I put 60 here as a magic number because that's how it's been over my 9 years of consulting. Maybe for others, the number may be different, but for me, that happens to be the magic number. And oftentimes my dad will call me and he's like, hey, the oil prices went up, they're $2 more now. I'm like, makes no difference. There could be $58 a barrel. It's not going to do me any good until it gets to a certain threshold. And why this number? Well, here's the deal. The deal is, who's calling the shots? Well, it's the procurement departments, it's the HR folks, the folks sitting in accounting. They are the decision makers as to, okay, now we have a budget for training. Okay, now we have a budget for consulting. So the higher this number is, the more leeway they will give people like exploration managers, and are like, okay, now have at it. Now we can bring in that consultant you've been wanting for a while. And now we can send your folks out to training courses. But even then, even when oil prices exceed $60 a barrel, you can see that I'm still spending most of my time marketing. Why is that? Well, here's the deal. This is not a full-time job, right? So every project you take on has an end to it. So you'll do something for 3 months. If it's a big project, maybe a year, but then it's over. And when it's over, where is the next paycheck coming from? You don't know. So you got to keep marketing. You got to keep marketing because you got to make sure that when your current project runs out, you're not just sitting there doing nothing. You have something to do. Okay. So, but this is how I'm spending most of my time. Now, face-to-face networking is huge in consulting. That's taken a hit because of COVID-19. For me personally, as a consultant, there's no point in going to APG meetings when they're virtual, when I can't stand there and I can't shake someone's hand and then talk to them. So, but if you're an introvert, this is tough, because what happens is, let's assume you give a talk. After the talk, someone comes up to you and like, hey, you did a good job, yada, yada, yada. We should go out for a beer sometimes. Or, hey, you should come to the trivia night. And if you're an introvert, you're like, I don't know. It can be challenging because you have to put yourself out there. You have to be in the limelight. Now, lately, there's been a trend. It's like everyone who's getting laid off puts consultant as their title the next day. And I understand why they do it. I mean, I know we're going through a rough period, and what people are afraid of is having that gap on their resume when companies start hiring again. And of course, you want to make money. You want to still be able to pay your bills. You want to stay involved. I think we as geoscientists, we're so passionate about what we do that once we get laid off, it's like we've lost a part of ourselves. So we still want to be involved. And so people will put consultant on their LinkedIn title. Now, the problem with that is when there's a round of layoffs in Exxon and all those folks put a consultant on their titles, essentially you're competing now. Okay, you're competing with company B that just had a round of layoffs 2 months ago. And together you're competing with all those folks who have consultant written on their title who got laid off 4 months ago or 6 months ago. So basically what we're saying is it's too many Indians, not enough Indians, it's too many chiefs, not enough Indians. It's if everyone's a consultant, who are we catering to here? So there's a lot of competition, is what I'm trying to say, and it's a lot of competition at the worst possible time. So what happens is you got to go somewhere else. Well, where is that somewhere else? Because the layoffs are all over the place. All right, so it's not just Houston. There are layoffs in Denver too. So maybe you need to cast a wider net. Maybe you need to go overseas. But if you're going overseas and now you're a consultant overseas, whatever, it kills the whole idea of being a consultant in the first place, which was, I want to be able to spend time with my family. I want to be able to spend time on my hobbies, my activities, make my own schedule. No, that's all out the door the moment you go overseas. Because when you go overseas, you're not going overseas for a week. You're going out there for months at a time, if not years. Some more disadvantages, which is why I put a pretty picture in the back for you to make up, for all the negativity here. So a lot of consultants work in-house at a company, which means you're back in that corporate culture, except that this is not that corporate culture that you signed up for. Okay, so let's assume you're somewhere in the Middle East working for a company, and guess what? Now that company culture is your company culture. So you have to learn to adapt to it, and it's not as easy as you think it is. I used to work in Norway for 2 years. I've been consulting in Norway for another 7 years, led several field trips, did a lot of courses for them. And I kid you not, it wasn't until almost 2 years ago that it finally clicked as to what can I do to make my Norwegian clients happy. And some cultures are complicated, and you may never be able to figure them out. And if you can't figure them out, you can't work for them because you're going to run into problems. There is no company medical plan. This means you're responsible for your insurance and your family's insurance, depending on how big your family is. This could be over $1,000 that you're paying every month in just insurance. There is no such thing as a regular paycheck. We get so spoiled when we're working full-time with companies that we don't even think about it. I mean, no, it's like, oh, it's the first, of course, I've got direct deposit. Of course, the money's going to be there. That's not like that in consulting. In fact, I'll tell you, 56 companies over 9 years, and maybe 2 paychecks were paid on time. Okay, so everyone is late, and that should be the expectation. You should expect that your payment is going to be late. How late ranges anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, which brings me to my next point, which is, if you're going to be dealing with consulting overseas, you got to be ready for the next level of bureaucracy. I mean, you don't even know what bureaucracy is until you start dealing with some of these overseas clients. And for them, it's nothing. It's natural because that's the system they're used to. As an example, it's a company I'm dealing with right now, started talking to them back in October. They were good to go, like what we do, were ready to give us the project. And then they had us go through paperwork and more paperwork and more paperwork. And some of the paperwork they're asking for is just totally irrelevant. Like they're asking for international trade agreements and things like that. And all that, we haven't even started the work yet. So there's a lot of red tape needed to get the contract. Then when the project actually starts, then you get more red tape. I've been on overseas assignments when I show up and they're like, oh, there's your desk. And I'm like, well, where's my computer? And they're like, well, we need permission to get you a computer. And I'm like, yeah, but I need a workstation, I need a workstation to interpret the seismic. So they're like, all right, we're going to go, they'll put in a ticket. How's that? And then that has to go through a bunch of managers. They need to put their signatures on it. Maybe one of the managers is out on a vacation of some sort. It took me a week just to get the computer. And I log in, and the first thing I want to do is download Google Earth. And I do that, and there's no internet. I'm like, why do I not have internet? He's like, well, you don't have permission to use internet at our company. We don't allow our consultants to have internet access. So it took me another week just so I could get internet on the computer. But so that's the red tape you have to deal with when you're actually working. And then there's the red tape involved with getting paid, which is, I've literally, there's been times when I've waited 3 months, like calling, just trying to get paid for work I've already done. And Finally, I get a hold of the person whose desk this file's been sitting on for the past 2 months. And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, why have I not been paid? And they're like, well, you never stamped the invoice. I'm like, stamp the invoice? We in the US no longer have those rubber stamps that you put on invoices. Like, well, that's what you need. We cannot process your invoice unless it has that stamp on it. So it's, man, this is where that world of, when I said you need a world of patience to do international consulting, that's where this comes in. Now, the next thing is, let's assume you're not even going overseas, but your clients are overseas. Clients are impatient, and rightly so. Like, think about it this way. So your toilet is overflowing, okay? You get on Craigslist, you call up the first plumber, and they don't answer their phone. But what are you going to do? You're not going to be like, well, I'm just going to wait another week or so, give this guy a call back, see how he feels. No, you're going to call the next person on the list. And if this next person on the list answers your phone call, guess what? They are your plumber from here onward. From here onward, anytime you need a plumber, you're going to guy number 2. You're never going to call that guy number 1 again because they didn't answer your phone. And this is how it works. If someone emails me right now and they're like, hey, we are interested in your book cliffs field trip. Well, guess what? I got to get back to them right away. Because if I don't, there's everyone and their mom leads field trips into book cliffs. So they're going to go to someone else and I'm going to lose out on this. So you got to be on top of it. But if you're going to be on top of it, this means you are working a lot. Like you're not working your regular 9 to 5, man. You're starting at, like I said, my day starts at 5 a.m. and it doesn't end till 9 p.m. at night. Next thing to know is that, yeah, you're working, you're doing this, you're trying to get everything right. But to your family, you're no longer dressing up in the morning. You're no longer driving half an hour through rush hour traffic to get to your office and back. So to them, you're not really working, even though you are. So this is tricky. I mean, just during this presentation, my son just came running in, and there's been times when I'm just totally focusing, on this log correlation and be like, okay, how do I need to make this work so it makes geological sense? And right when I'm just totally in the zone, I'll have someone from my family come down and be like, hey, you need to shovel that snow. It's been snowing quite a bit. So it's very, that can be challenging. And I think a lot of you are probably used to that working from home, because of COVID. And finally, again, this is where the patience comes in. Even the most successful consultants land 1 out of 20 jobs they apply for. So if you don't like applying for stuff, which you've probably been doing right now, remember, if you're a consultant, this doesn't stop. You're just constantly going. You're constantly applying for stuff. Okay, so those are the disadvantages. So the next part I'm going to talk about is the ugly. Okay, so these are circumstances that are beyond your control. All right, for example, geoscience consultants are expected to have a certain look and feel. And this is not just in the US, this is all over the world. Okay, so what is that look and feel? Well, to make people feel giddy inside and for them to respect you and for them to think you know what you're talking about, you got to be over 50, Caucasian, male, preferably with some gray hair, and with a name with a good old solid name like Bob or Bill. Okay, that produces that feel-good factor, and that works. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to get any work if you don't fit the stereotype, but I'll tell you what, the further you deviate from this norm, the harder it will be for people to take you seriously and for you to get business. So you could be a 33-year-old Bob, and it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be as easy as a 70-year-old Bob, okay? Or if you flip this and your name is not even Bob, your name is Sarah. Man, now this or Brandy. Now this is tough. This is tough because you're competing with the Bobs and the Bills, okay? And if you think that is bad, try being an Ollie Joffrey, and then it's and that's just how it is. And then there's and that's not going to change. Okay, and it's not just an American thing. This is a global thing, because you have to remember that most of the world was colonized by Caucasian individuals at some point. And in a lot of these post-colonial countries, if you go down there, man, you know, by default, someone who fits the stereotype knows way more than any non-white person ever will. So, you know, just that's the ugly side of consulting, but that's not going to change. The other thing is, scientists don't die, they retire. I remember bringing this up at a field trip, and this consultant, Mike Boyles, was there. Super cool guy, an amazing sequence stratigrapher, and he's funny as hell. And he started giving me a hard time. He's like, I think, you know, what all he wants to do is he wants to put all this old consultants on an iceberg, kind of push us away into the ocean. And that's not true, of course. But you got to remember that as long as, you know, I get it. These folks are so passionate about what they do. They want to still be out there. They want to be involved. But then at the same time, when they're out there offering stuff for free, it makes it super hard for someone who has maybe half the experience to be able to sell that stuff when it's being given out for free. Okay. And again, you got to remember that even if you fit the profile, there's always someone older with more experience who's doing this for free, and you're competing with these guys. Okay, so, you know, but like I said, that's just something to be aware of. Consulting is all about networking, which means if you're not part of the good old boys club, and it could be, you know, the good old boys club could be a lot of different things. I recently found out in Denver that it's the book club, and if you're not part of the books, there's a certain book club where folks meet and they decide who gets what. But if you're not playing golf and your wife is not going to church with the wives of the decision makers, then you're outside the circle of trust, and it can be impossible to get in. And even though you're super smart, you know, let's assume you just got laid off from a company where you were working for the past 25, 30 years. You're really good at what you do, but you got to remember that every city, whether it's Casper, Denver, Houston, wherever, they have this hierarchy of consulting gigs, and that's how it works. I'm super familiar with it in Denver. I mean, I know how low I am on the totem pole. So it's almost like trickle down consulting. Like the first guy has to say no, and then it goes to a certain gal. And if she says no, it goes to another guy. And if he says no, then maybe I'll get it. So that's just how it is. I remember my boss at Chevron, and his standard greeting was like, anytime he met you, the first thing he'd be like, so where do you live? And then the next question would be like, what church do you go to? And if you don't go to church, you're done. You know, it's game over. He's not interested. So, you know, again, these are one of those things that are not going to change, and that's the ugly part of the consulting world. And then the last thing you need to know is when oil prices crash. So you wake up in the morning and oil price is negative $37 a barrel. You know you're going to get laid off, but you'll get a severance package. And I talked to a lot of folks, and yes, they're emotionally distraught, but I'm like, how are you doing financially? Oh, no, financially I'm fine. I did get a severance package. Well, I guess who doesn't get a severance package? Consultants don't get a severance package. Okay, so, and this is rough. I cannot stress this enough, because I'll give you an example. In January, my phone would not quit ringing. I was on an ice climbing trip, and my phone literally would not quit ringing because I was getting phone calls from across the globe. Hey, we want this course, we want that course, we want this project. Can you do this? Can you teach for us here? In fact, it was overwhelming. I had 20 different gigs for myself and my team. And then oil prices tanked, and we lost all 20 of those projects. Not a single one survived. So then what do? You don't have a severance package. So then you got to have a backup plan. So here I am teaching self-defense lessons in Denver. And you can see, obviously, I'm pretty exceptional at it, you know, or, you know, I've been a rock climbing instructor or an ice climbing instructor, you know, teaching people how to rock climb at a climbing gym or something. I mean, you got to survive. But again, you have to keep in mind that these things hit you a lot harder when you're a consultant because there is no severance package. Anyways, if I have not scared you enough, let's talk about getting set up. So here's like here's a checklist I want you to work through. You got to check your finances. Let's assume you do become an independent consultant and it doesn't work out. How long can you go without earning? Okay, should you just sit and wait and be like, hey, you know, I'm a consultant now and somehow I'm going to get work? How long are you going to do that for? How long can you go? Okay, if you can go 6 months without it, okay, good. Can you offer something no one else is offering within your geographic area? Now, this is an important one to think about. Let's assume you're in Houston right now, you got laid off, and you were an asset team manager for a large oil and gas company. And what you did for work is field development, well planning, a little bit of geosteering. You know, you're familiar with all the software packages, Petra, Petrel. Well, what are you doing different? Because isn't everyone doing kind of that? So what are you possibly offering? I get messages from people on LinkedIn all the time. They're like, hey, we would like to work with you. And I'm like, all right, what can you offer? And they'll be like, well, I've got, you know, I've been a development geologist for 10 years, exploration geologist for 15. I can do this, I can do that. And I'm like, that's great, but you have to remember that when I approach clients, that's what they're doing already. Consultants, oftentimes, we're like your internet provider. No one calls your internet provider as long as your internet is working fine. You only call them when your internet is not working. And consulting works the same way. Folks who are in oil and gas companies think they have a very good handle on everything. So it's very hard to sell. They're like, hey, I can do everything you're doing, except I can do it better. No, you got to offer something that they know for a fact they can do. And the current oil price climate is what you're offering worth paying extra for. So this is where I come in. You know, I describe core. I'm a sedimentologist. I do sedimentology, sequence stratigraphy. But guess what? No one cares about sedimentology, sequence stratigraphy right now. No one is taking core right now, let alone having someone do any science. Okay, so there is no demand. And if there's no demand, I'm not getting any phone calls. How easy would it be for you to be able to sell your services? And do you know people who have signing authority? This I cannot stress enough. Yeah, you could be super popular, you have a huge network, but do these folks that are working in these oil and gas companies who know you super well and know how smart you are, do they have signing authority? And I'll tell you what, you know, for my master's, I went to OSU, that was an oil school. Pretty much everyone, all my friends in grad school, they're all working for oil and gas companies. How many of them do you think have been able to hook me up with any work? Zero. Why is that? Oh, because they're just not high enough. They're just not high up enough. They're at this level where, yeah, they can put in a good word for me to their boss, but it's their boss who's signing. And guess who their boss wants? His boss wants their college buddy, you know, that this person they play golf with. So it's anyways, if you answered yes to all of these, then you get to the easy part, which is establishing an S corporation. So you'll start an LLC. This is the website for Colorado. Let me show you the website for Texas. If you want a link to the website, all you have to do is email me, and here it is. Okay. So here's the website for Texas where you can go and register. You can do this yourself. I would not even mess with doing this yourself, because after doing this, you have to do other stuff like payroll and things like that. So you go to a CPA, and the CPA does it for you. Now be very careful, because I'll tell you what, I wanted to put the CPA that I started with, you know, their firm, but then I figured they'd get upset and, you know, they'd come at me with lawyers. But your CPA should not be charging you $5,000 to $10,000 a year. Okay, and that's how my CPA was. They would charge me for email communication. They would charge me for phone calls. They were like a damn lawyer, and they really didn't save me that much money. So A good CPA is key, and they'll set you up. They will create the limited liability company for you. The S Corp takes about $400 to $600, depending on where you're at. They'll do that for you. They'll set up monthly payroll. And if you want recommendations on a good CPA, I can do that for you. You definitely need a website. You can either do this yourself or contact me. I'll hook you up with some web developers who can do this for less than $1,000 and make it look nice and pretty. But you got to have a website, because in the year 2021, if you're on social media marketing, what are you marketing if you don't have a website? Your website is like your shop. People like to go there they like to get a feel for what you're all about. You need a website. Now, you do need to create social media accounts just so you can market your website. So the goal is, okay, this is a course we're offering. You want more details? Click here. That click is supposed to take them to your website. Now, get your business cards printed, hand them out to everyone, let everyone know about your services. Now, here's the thing. You cannot overdo this. I'll give you an example. I don't know anything about geomechanics, but when I hear the word geomechanics, the first thing that comes into my mind is Amy Fox. I don't even know Amy Fox. I've never met Amy Fox. Okay, I'm sure she's smart. She's working for a competitor of mine, but the fact is she's the one who comes up. Why is that? I have a geomechanics specialist who's working for me, but still the first person that comes to my mind is Amy Fox. And the reason for that is she puts herself out there. I see her stuff on LinkedIn. I see her talks. She is just out there in your face. And she has become synonymous with geomechanics. So if I'm an exploration manager, who do you think I'm going to call when I need some geomechanics work done? So this is how it needs to be. This is how our minds work. Okay. So, I mean, if you're like this rabbit who's living underneath the rock, and it's totally okay not to know who Applied Stratigraphics is, but that's, for everyone else, we'll make sure you know about us. So that's it for today. We are on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel where we put our webinars, videos. We've got a Facebook group as well. Again, that's all part of the marketing we do. If you've got any questions, I know this is hard. Okay, I know how tough this is. It messes with your head. It's not even the finances. I think it's the emotional part, because we as geologists love what we do. And when we're not doing it, we're not ourselves. So I know what you're going through. I know this is tough, but we have to get through this together, which is why I put this, I did this talk for you guys, and I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, let me know. If you need help, let me know. If you have any specific questions about consulting, about websites, about paperwork, about printing brochures, whatever, about consulting resumes versus the sort of resume you use to apply at a job, I will do what I can. I believe in karma. I think the positive energy you put out there comes back to you. I've seen examples of it happening. I don't know Jason Flom personally. I used to just keep seeing his LinkedIn posts, and I see, man, I'm like, this guy is really going out of his way to help people out, until one day I find out that Jason Flom got the sedimentologist position in Denver. And that's a job I personally know multiple people apply for. Over 600 people apply for that job. Jason is the one who got it. And you can argue he got it because he was the best person for the job. I would actually argue he got it because of all the positive energy that he put out there. And so that's what it's all about. Just be strong, keep your head up, and let us know if there's anything we can do for you. And because I am Applied Stratigraphics, and the marketing never stops. If you're an unemployed professional, you want to take a course with us, all members of our community in transition get 50% off on all our courses. And I hope this was helpful, and please keep in touch. Thank you for your time.